What is up, everybody, and welcome to a brand new Patreon pick video. And this month, the topic of choice is top 10 horror movie soundtracks. So if you don't know what a Patreon pick is, on my Patreon page, which is all of my crowdfunding followers, every single month I give them the opportunity to pick a topic for a video. We do a poll, and this one was the most recent one to win out. And it's actually a topic that has made the poll a number of times, but has not won until now. Now, the only thing about this topic is that when you say movie soundtracks, there are a group of people that think of the score, the music that was composed for the film. And then there's the people that think of the collection of popular music from various music artists that are released in succession with the film. And so because I was not ultimately clear on which of those definitions my patrons were thinking of whenever they suggested this or when they were voting on this, and also because I am about a month behind on getting this video out, I'm going to do both of those videos. So the one that you're going to be able to watch right now is all of the top 10 movie soundtracks as far as the scores. And I'm going to do another shorter video that is going to be patron exclusive, where I'm going to talk about all of my favorite movie soundtracks that are a bunch of various artists. I think it's also important to notate that I am by no means a super educated or a super insightful person when it comes to music scores. Like, I am not going to be able to tell you very much about how this music was created and the instruments that they used and the inspiration for it and a whole lot of the history there. There's a lot of other people that are much better at talking about that than I am. All I'm going to focus on is telling you what this music makes me feel, why I like it, why I cherish it, why I feel like it complements the film so well, and why it makes my top 10. And with all that being started, we're going to kick this thing off with my number 10, which is a movie that I actually was very late to the party on, and I kick myself in the ass every single time that I rewatch it, why I waited so long to check it out. And that is going to be Candyman. And the score for this film was composed by Bernard Rose. And what I love so much about this score is that maybe more than any other film on this list, the score completely evokes all of the themes and all of the tones that the movie itself is going for, where you have that gothic nature, you have this romance angle in there, like you have like Helen's theme, for example, within this score that starts with this very beautiful piano melody. It is very romantic. It's very like old school, almost like Victorian era in nature. And then slowly you start to get like this gothic opera note that starts to come into it, almost like the emergence of Candyman. And so just the music itself really creates the vibe of this movie all on its own, where you could almost just listen to the film and completely understand everything that's supposed to be going on visually. And so it's one of those scores that I just really value for that. It's awesome to listen to. Every time you hear certain notes about it, you just kind of get the chills. Like, you get the feeling that Candyman is right behind you somewhere. And that's what a great horror movie score can do. It evokes the emotions in you that the movie itself is supposed to evoke in you just by listening to the music. Coming in at number 9 is the most recent addition to this list as far as newer films, and that is going to be It Follows, and the score was composed by Disaster Piece. Now, luckily, we're finally getting They Follow, probably sometime next year, so hopefully Disaster Piece will come back and we'll get an even more incredible score from them. But what I love about this It Follows score is that it really taps into that old school vintage like synth sound from the 80s primarily, but it has such a modern edge to it. And so you have a lot of these like really effective synth sections where it's just trying to evoke like this sense of paranoia in you. But then you get these segments that have this very unique character to it, almost like they're giving the entity itself its own soundtrack. And so it's just a very complex score to me. It's something that all throughout the movie, there's different sections of it that give me different emotions. And it just really brings the old school and the new school together, very much like the movie itself. This very old school approach to the filmmaking while having kind of this modern aesthetic and this modern take on this entity that is following you, and the commentary they're trying to make with all of that. So it's one of those scores to me that just has a lot of character. It's got a lot of unique aspects to it that really make it stand out for me. 8 to me is the most underrated and underappreciated score and soundtrack on this entire list. And I've tried my best to limit myself to 3 entries from John Carpenter, because a lot of us could probably make a full top 10 that's basically just starring that man's work. But this one is not only one of the most underrated scores, period, but it's by far his most underrated score, and that is Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. And also got to give credit to Alan Howarth as well. There was a number of his scores that he collaborated with him on. But Halloween 3, to me, is one of the best horror movie scores of all time. And it's just the score itself almost gives the movie the vibe like John Carpenter directed it, just because his style is all over it through the music. And so, like, Chariots of Pumpkins would be my favorite section of music from this entire soundtrack. And it has, like, the old school synth stuff that he used to do a lot more in the 80s especially, but it has, like, this galloping tone to it where it almost feels like you see the kids marching with their costumes just listening to this film. And of course, with most Carpenter scores, there's a lot of different segments where they're trying to have like the suspense side of things, and you have kind of the slower segments where he's trying to build some tension. And so it's a very well-rounded score, but I just think it has some of the most character of any of his scores. And the movie inherently is very campy. It's very silly at times. It's a very over-the-top concept. And in a lot of ways, I feel like it's Carpenter and Howarth's score that grounds the movie into still being very effectively creepy and being very effectively tense throughout all of the crazy, wild things that are happening. And so it's just such an important piece of the DNA of that movie. And it's one of the Carpenter scores that I'll put on and listen to more than a lot of his more popular ones. Coming in at number 7, certainly one of the more iconic ones for me, and that is Jerry Goldsmith's soundtrack for The Omen. The Omen soundtrack is so iconic that whenever anybody is trying to like evoke like a demonic tone to something that they're saying, even if it's in a comedic way, anybody trying to bring that kind of element in here will do some kind of like a mock version of this score, like and just them doing that, no matter how silly or stupid it is, you know what they're going for. You're like, oh, Damien, okay, I get what you're saying. And so it's one of those scores that almost feels like it's just as much ingrained into pop culture as it is some of us movie nerds that just love the film. And what's interesting about this one is that it so teeters on the edge of almost being overbearing at times, because it's one of those soundtracks where it really ramps up in certain segments of the film. Like a lot of The Omen is kind of more quiet and still, and then you'll get things where, like the scene where the wife is trying to pull her shirt off in the hospital, and then she looks, and through like the veil of her shirt, she sees the nanny that is very much like a caretaker for Damien and a demon worshiper, a devil worshiper. And so just like seeing her, I promise that's the last time I'm doing a version of the score. But you get those segments of the movies where suddenly something crazy is about to happen. Something tense is about to happen. Something wild is in front of you right now. And they ramp up that orchestral score. And so it's just one of those that, like, not only do I love the way that it complements the film, and it is one of my favorite horror films of all time, but I guess because of how much it's been parodied and how much it's been utilized, and even just the 2 ways that I did, it's one of the more iconic scores that when you say horror movie soundtrack to me, that always pops into my head among the first. Coming in at number 6, you knew it was going to be on here somewhere, and it's going to be John Carpenter's score for 1978's Halloween. There's a solid argument that this is one of, if not the most recognizable horror movie soundtracks of all time. I mean, there's multiple pieces of music to this that is ingrained into a bunch of horror movie and just general movie fans' skulls for life. It's the only thing that I know how to play on piano is the opening segment of the Halloween score. And it's one thing that you can play this soundtrack, any segment of this soundtrack, not even just the main theme. You can play any segment of this soundtrack And the majority of the times, even if somebody's not a big horror movie fan, they're going to know exactly what movie that's from. And so, of course, credit where credit is due for something like that. It's easily one of the most well-known and popular scores of all time. It's certainly John Carpenter's most popular score, which is a very tall order for him. But, you know, for as much as I've certainly got burnt out on this film, talking about it, hearing about it, having to go toe-to-toe with the fan base numerous times, that score is absolutely something that belongs on this list. Coming in at number 5, another one that you knew was going to be on here somewhere, and that is A Nightmare on Elm Street, and this was composed by Charles Bernstein. And what I love so much about this score, aside from the fact that it's the soundtrack to one of my favorite films of all time and one of my favorite franchises of all time, is that it just like with Candyman, it is so good about evoking certain pieces of the story and the nature of the movie and the tone that they're going for just with the pieces of music. Like the main Nightmare on Elm Street theme almost has like this lullaby quality to it. It's something that's supposed to like almost evoke some kind of comfort in you as you're drifting off to sleep. And then you get these little crashes of music here and there. And the strings and the certain sound effects that are giving you, because you've seen the movie especially, they give you the visual of you being in that boiler room and somebody's lurking around. And especially the way you get that segment of music that's like, nee, 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 nee. It's almost like this taunting nature to it. Like you've been drifting off to sleep and now it's taunting you that you can't escape. And I love pieces of music that almost tell a story without any words, without any kind of visual storytelling. You get some kind of narrative from the pieces of music and how they're all arranged together. And this is one of the best scores as far as doing that for me. So not only one of my favorites of all time just because of the film, but I love the narrative structure of how this music is put together. Coming in at number 4, possibly even stronger of an argument than John Carpenter's Halloween as the most recognizable horror film score of all time, and that is John Williams' score for the original Jaws. Now, I really don't want to get into an argument or debate with people in the comments about Jaws being or not being a horror film. For me, it's a horror film. Yes, there's other things in there. Yes, there's drama and there's some other stuff. It's not like a clean-cut horror film where it's indisputable, but it's a film that literally made generations terrified to go into the water. And it's horrific, especially in certain segments where you have the shark attacks and the opening of the film. So, like, to me, it leans much more into horror than it does not. With that being said, though, Jaws, I mean, just like with Halloween, you don't even need to play the music. You can just go da-dum, da-dum, dum 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 dum. And again, every single person damn near that you do that to, they're going to know exactly what movie it's from. They're going to know exactly what you're trying to play into. They're going to know exactly the scene that that's from. It's just one of those scores that is absolutely ubiquitous. It is something that is so ingrained into pop culture. It is so ingrained into the consciousness of society that it is, in my opinion, even over Halloween, the most iconic, the most well-known horror movie score of all time. I mean, John Williams in general, it's not even a debate. It's a fact that he is the most well-known, most celebrated, like the most accomplished movie composer of all time. Basically, every single movie score, whether it's horror or not, that you can replicate some notes of the music from it and get so many people to immediately know the film. Pretty much all of those examples are John Williams films, whether it's Jaws or Indiana Jones or Jurassic Park or Star Wars. And so just John Williams in general is the master. If there is a master, it's him. And the Jaws soundtrack, to me, it's so simple, yet so effective. You know, it's something that it's not really as flashy as a lot of other soundtracks on this list. And yet it is so effective with the simplicity there, where that score paired with the movie has caused so much irreparable psychological damage to human beings ever since the 70s. Now we're into my top 3. We are at the Titans, and coming in at number 3 is John Carpenter's The Thing, that surprisingly for a lot of people was not actually composed by John Carpenter himself. For a film that right up with Halloween is his most well-known and his most celebrated work, It's often a fun fact that Ennio Morricone actually did the composition for this music. One of the few times that John Carpenter let somebody else be the master of the sound of his films. And, you know, good on him for this one because it's one of the greatest horror movie scores of all time. And what I love so much about The Thing, very simple or very similar to Jaws and how simple and how minimalist it is. It's not nearly as flashy or as synth forward, or it doesn't have as much character as a lot of John Carpenter's scores. And I think that's actually to the soundtrack and the movie's benefit, because the way that Ennio Morricone composes this music, it's almost like a heartbeat for me. It's almost like that growing paranoia of the different characters as they're in this situation. You just get that bum, 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 bum. Like, to me, that evokes the heartbeat and the rising heartbeat of this situation. And so it's one of those scores that, you know, it's not as flashy to sit around and listen to it necessarily. It's not something that you would necessarily put into your headphones to go work out or to get into work mode. But as far as complementing the movie that it's in and being its own piece of the character of the film, it's one of my all-time favorites. It's one of the ones that I value the most for what it brings. Coming in at number 2, and these top 2 were very hard for me to decide between. If I could have tied them, I would have tied them. But ultimately, I landed on number 2 being Fred Myron's score for Phantasm. Phantasm is not only one of my favorite films of all time, the first 2 especially, but I absolutely adore the score and the soundtrack to this movie. It's one that I feel like has been subtly ripped off in so many other horror films since. Like, it has this character to it that is kind of similar to the way that Candyman's is, where it has this very beautiful nature to it with the piano that starts off with this score. And then as it goes on, you get these creepy little elements that are added into there with these different instruments and these different sounds that they're going for. And it almost takes you on the ride of this movie just listening to that main title theme. Like, not even just the rest of the soundtrack, just that one track takes you on this roller coaster ride of emotions like the movie does. And it almost has that puzzling, incoherent nature of the movies itself too, which is, again, something that I just love. When a soundtrack and a score can kind of give you a replicated version of the emotions you're going to go through and the ride you're going to go through in the movie, those are the ones that I like the most. Those are the ones that always mean the most to me. So Phantasm is one where anytime I hear a cover of it, you see a lot of metal bands try to do versions of it, or they'll throw a little piece of the score in there for fans and stuff. It's the horror movie score that will charm me the most if somebody puts a piece of that in there or recognizes it or pays some kind of homage to it. So I absolutely love the Phantasm score. But coming in at number 1 for me, my favorite horror movie soundtrack of all time, and this might be a little bit of a hot take, is Christine. So it had to be John Carpenter. I knew at some point it was probably going to be one of his films, but John Carpenter and Alan Howarth's score and soundtrack for Christine is my favorite music that John Carpenter has ever done. To me, it gives such a well-rounded experience. Like, it has that creepy, tension-building synth score to it, that quality that a lot of his scores have, but it also kind of has this galloping nature to it, giving you the feeling that Christine is like gaining on you, almost like it's chasing you down in the night, and you just see those headlights coming. There's this cool quality to it. I loved the remix version that he did not too long ago when he did that album where he remastered and remixed a lot of his sections of music, and he had a little soundtrack, or excuse me, he had a music video that came out where Carpenter was the one driving Christine. Such a cool modernization of that score. I absolutely love that movie. Like, it's in my top 3 Carpenter films, and it's not in many people's top 3, but it's always been one of my favorites, and that score is one of my favorite parts to it. Like, the scene whenever you have one of the bullies that tore the shit out of his car, and he's just in the middle of the street, and he sees Christine just sitting there in the dark playing that 50s music, and he says, "Hey, Cunningham, you ain't mad, are you?" And then all of a sudden, pew, the headlights come on and that score kicks in. Like, I get chills just recapping that scene. That's one of my favorite scenes of any Carpenter movie just because of the way that the score kicks in. So I could go on for hours just about number one here, but Christine for me is my number one. That's my favorite horror movie soundtrack of all time. It is king. And yeah, as much as I love number two, it was, once I sat and thought about it, it was an easy number one for me. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put my playlist up here of all my John Carpenter reviews if you want to check that out and see, you know, 3 of these movies, or at least 2 of these movies that I just talked about. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss everything in the future. Thank you so much to my patrons, as always, for your support and for this topic. It was very fun. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.